It's official, South Korea is out of the World Cup, failing to even cross the threshold into the round of 32. Under the new rules, 38 teams advanced out of the group stages, but South Korea couldn't even secure a spot among those top third-place finishers, bringing their entire journey to a sudden, painful end right here. What makes this blowout so incredibly hard to swallow is that South Korea entered the tournament with every single card stacked in their favor. Analysts everywhere were calling this roster their absolute golden generation, boasting more players in elite European leagues than ever before. And crucially, their star players were completely healthy, without a single major injury. On top of that, the expansion to a 48-team format pushed South Korea right into Pot 2, giving them a massive advantage before the balls were even drawn. That seeding set them up for what should have been the easiest group stage in their country's history. Looking at their opponents, the host nation Mexico, the Czech Republic, and South Africa, anyone could see that South Korea had been handed a dream ticket. As the matches drew closer, the stars aligned even further for them because the Czech team arrived in Mexico just 2 days before kickoff, leaving their players completely gassed and unable to adjust to the brutal high altitude. Meanwhile, Mexico lost their veteran team captain to injury, and South Africa's midfield anchor was ruled out as well. While their opponents were scrambling, South Korea did everything right on paper by setting up a training camp in Mexico a full month early to get used to the thin air, meaning their actual travel time to the stadium was shorter than even the host nations. Even if they had just managed a second-place finish in the group, the bracket was wide open, with a highly winnable match against Canada waiting for them in the next round. The Federation spared no expense, backing the team with top-tier sports psychologists, European tactical consultants, and a record-breaking bonus package that promised to reward them like never before. Everything was perfectly aligned for a historic run, but head coach Hong Myung-bo delivered one of the most disastrous performances the nation has ever seen. It turns out that in the very group where South Korea was supposed to feast, they became nothing more than an easy victory for everyone else. This collapse is a massive embarrassment, especially considering the tournament's expanded format opened the doors wide for 32 teams to advance, meaning that if the World Cup had stuck to its traditional setup, South Korea's performance wouldn't have even earned them a spot on the plane to the tournament in the first place. With this sudden exit, South Korea is projected to tank in the global rankings, plummeting from 21st to 31st place. That is a massive 10-spot drop, dragging them outside the top 30 nations for the first time in 4 years. International media outlets wasted no time tearing this performance to shreds, with major global networks pointing out that failing to advance with a squad this talented is completely unacceptable. Foreign analysts noted that the humiliation felt like a repeat of South Korea's disastrous campaign back in 2014, and the consensus across global sports desks was clear. The head coach must answer for this failure. To his credit, the manager did face the cameras and stated that he would take full responsibility for the outcome. However, looking closely at his press conferences, he spent the entire time pointing fingers at the players' form, the harsh weather conditions, and various outside factors, while completely avoiding any mention of his own rigid tactics or his questionable substitutions during the matches. This deflective behavior leaves a massive question mark over what his promise to take responsibility actually means. Fans are left wondering if he plans to stubbornly hold onto his job through the next continental tournament, or if he will show some self-respect and step down after wrecking a major World Cup campaign. The situation is heartbreaking, because this tournament was the absolute last chance for South Korea's veteran captain to play at full strength on the world stage. At the exact same time, their star playmaker was in the absolute prime of his career, and he will already be 30 by the time the next tournament rolls around. Right when the nation's key players were perfectly aligned and at their absolute peak, the manager's uninspired leadership completely wasted their best opportunity. This constant evasion of blame is incredibly irresponsible. The manager previously claimed that he returned to the national team to save the country's soccer program, but his actions on the sideline showed his true motivation, which was simply trying to erase the stain of his own failure from 12 years ago. Looking back at his 3-year tenure, it is impossible to find a single piece of tactical progress or any real innovation that he brought to the team's identity. Over a decade has passed since that nightmare in Brazil, where the players were met with intense anger from fans upon returning home. Yet the leadership at the top, from the federation president down to the head coach, remains the exact same circle of faces. There has been absolutely zero evolution in how the sport is run in the country. Unfortunately, this early exit is not the rock bottom of their decline, but rather the opening act of a much deeper crisis for South Korean soccer. To understand how a golden generation was brought to ruin, and why the real storm is just starting to hit, we need to look at what is happening behind closed doors. The truth is, the warning signs for South Korean soccer had been flashing long before this tournament even began. During the previous Continental Cup, right after their Portuguese manager stepped down, the newly appointed German coach led the team into an absolute disaster, which peaked with a humiliating semi-final exit against a much weaker opponent. Yet, this was no freak accident, as everyone already knew exactly who he was. Even before he arrived, European soccer analysts had widely exposed him as lazy, completely detached from his duties, and tactically hollow. Despite those red flags, the most powerful man in the Federation single-handedly forced his appointment against all advice. Then, when the tournament ended in embarrassment, both the leadership and the coach shamelessly shifted the entire blame onto the players. The Federation turned a minor locker room argument between two star players into a media shield, letting the grown men in the front office hide from public outrage. In fact, the governing body was the very first to confirm the dispute to reporters, moving at lightning speed to distract everyone from their own incompetence. Right after that internal chaos, the man brought in to supposedly restore discipline was Hong Myung-bo. From day one, the completely rigged and unfair hiring process caused fans to turn their backs on him, with the public refusing to recognize his authority. The Federation completely ignored this outrage, and that arrogance crushed the fans' spirits, driving them away from the stadiums. You only had to look at the warm-up matches earlier this year to see the total disconnect. The National Stadium was practically empty, something completely unheard of, yet the manager was clearly arrogant enough to believe that winning matches at the big tournament would automatically silence the critics and force fans to cheer for him again. That shameless overconfidence was deeply frustrating to watch, especially because the actual games proved he was completely helpless on the sideline. His biggest tactical blunder came just a year before the tournament, when he suddenly scrapped the four-back defensive system the team had successfully used for years, blindly switching to a three-back formation instead. The manager claimed that packing the backline would make South Korea more secure, but instead, the defense gave up goals in all three group stage matches, resulting in 2 devastating losses. On the pitch, the wingbacks were completely lost, the midfielders were isolated, and the team kept passing the ball back and forth in a useless U-shape, without ever penetrating the opponent's territory. All the glaring weaknesses that had been exposed during the warm-up matches were completely ignored by the coaching staff. The attack was an even bigger mess, relying entirely on individual brilliance rather than team play. Whenever South Korea stalled, the only visible strategy was hoping the captain would score out of nowhere, or waiting for the star playmaker to create magic all by himself. In fact, whenever that young midfielder was off the pitch, the entire passing rhythm ground to a complete halt. There were no rehearsed patterns, no fluid off-the-ball movements, and absolutely no set-piece routines during attacking phases. The most absurd part of this disaster was exposed in a recent behind-the-scenes documentary released to the public. During a team meeting, the manager explicitly told the players that the wide wingbacks should never drop back to collect the ball, but should instead stay high and wait in their positions. This proved that the stagnant play on the flanks was actually a deliberate tactical choice by the coach, not a lack of effort from the players. That rigid restriction completely suffocated their creativity, because modern soccer requires constant movement to drag opponents out of position and open up spaces for teammates to run into. That is exactly why a team needs clear tactical direction from the bench. Despite having top-tier talent at his disposal, the man in charge failed to provide any real vision, and his restrictive commands made the attack incredibly predictable and easy to defend against. This complete tactical failure led frustrated fans to joke that if the players had just been left to play with zero instructions, like they did under the previous German manager, South Korea probably would have sailed right into the round of 32. Beyond the poor tactics, the coach's roster management made absolutely no sense. After a lucky substitution worked out against the Czech Republic, the manager became so overconfident that he repeated the exact same substitution pattern at the exact same minute in the following match, a rigid move that directly cost them the game. By the time they faced South Africa, the manager made a reckless gamble, benching both the team captain and their veteran midfielder to start 2 young forwards with almost no international experience. The gamble backfired completely, as the frontline looked totally disconnected, and the situation got so bad during the game that the star playmaker turned toward the bench and shouted at the coaching staff, demanding immediate changes. The young midfielder pleaded with the staff, shouting that they needed to get the veteran midfielder onto the pitch immediately because they were running out of time. Yet, completely ignoring the warning, Hung Myungbo made a baffling move, pulling their star center-back out of the game to bring on a purely defensive fullback instead. With South Korea chasing a goal, this decision made so little sense that the star defender openly showed his frustration as he walked off the pitch. Looking at the disasters against Mexico and South Africa, it was obvious to anyone watching that the locker room was completely fractured. The united front the manager kept preaching to reporters was nothing more than a hollow lie. However, the real breaking point for fans came during the post-match press conferences. When asked about the defeat, the manager actually blamed the intense heat in Monterrey, even casually telling reporters that he had no idea why his players' performance dropped so suddenly. That total lack of accountability left everyone wondering if he was supposed to be leading the team or just watching from the stands. If the man drawing the plays cannot explain why the team collapsed, who are the fans supposed to trust? This is the portrait of an incredibly selfish manager, someone who demands absolute control over the roster, but completely ducks the consequences when things fall apart. The ultimate irony is that in his own doctoral thesis, this exact same coach wrote extensively about how a manager taking full responsibility is the single most important factor in a major tournament. Yet, during his second stint leading the national team, his actions were the exact opposite. From the warm-up match against Brazil to the recent loss against Mexico, instead of shielding his players, he went on television and explicitly called out individual mistakes made by his defenders and goalkeeper. That subtle move was a clear attempt to slide the blame onto his own roster, just to protect his personal reputation. The primary source of the fans' raging anger is, of course, the terrible record on the pitch. However, what hurts the public even deeper is the manager's absolute refusal to admit his tactical failures, combined with the fact that he completely ignores how he got the job through a rigged hiring process in the first place. He refuses to take ownership of a single mistake in this entire sequence. The failure is made worse by looking at what is happening next door in Japan. The performance gap between the two countries has grown so wide that even casual viewers can see it. In their last 10 head-to-head matchups, South Korea managed only 2 wins, drawing 3 and losing 5. Even worse, the last 3 meetings ended in 0-0-3, and 0-3 defeats, a humiliating stretch where South Korean attackers could not score a single goal while the defense gave up 7. Japan even pulled off massive upsets by beating Brazil last year and taking down England this year. During the recent World Cup group stage, they faced a brutal draw against the Netherlands, Sweden, and Tunisia, yet they comfortably advanced to the round of 32 with an undefeated record. However, the most alarming issue is not even the senior national team. The under-23 Olympic squad, which is supposed to be the absolute foundation of South Korean soccer, is collapsing just as fast. Under their previous manager, South Korea failed to qualify for the Paris Olympics back in 2024, snapping a historic 40-year qualification streak. After that manager stepped down, the federation left the head coaching seat vacant for an entire year, forcing the country's top young talents to completely waste 12 months of crucial developmental time. The situation grew even worse once the new manager finally took over. The under-23 team suffered a tough loss to a Central Asian opponent in the qualifiers, and then dropped a shocking match against a Southeast Asian team in the continental tournament, leaving them with a disappointing 4th-place finish. Their recent friendly matches have been just as disastrous, including a blowout 1-4 loss against the United States, a defeat to neighboring China, and a stunning 0-1 loss against a weaker Middle Eastern opponent. This string of failures makes absolutely no sense because South Korea currently has an unprecedented number of young prospects playing abroad in elite international leagues. The exact generation that previously made a historic run to the Under-20 World Cup semifinals under their former manager has reached full maturity, yet, under the Federation's terrible management, the youth program's performance is actually moving backward. Therefore, South Korea's early exit from the group stage this year was never an isolated incident. The senior national team had completely lost its identity. The performance gap with their primary rival had grown into a canyon, and the youth system was left in total chaos. This collapse is the inevitable result of massive structural failures that the Federation allowed to rot for years. If the entire system is not torn down and rebuilt immediately, this failure will not be the end of the decline, but but rather the beginning of a much deeper, more permanent fall. Right before the tournament kicked off, the most powerful man in the Federation finally announced his resignation under intense public pressure. That exit immediately caused a wave of relief among fans, who celebrated the news because they believed the sport in their country was finally turning a corner. Looking back at that president's tenure, the number of scandals and missteps is almost too high to count. From bringing in the lazy German manager and getting stuck with a massive contract buyout, to quietly pardoning individuals involved in match fixing, his leadership was defined by treating the Federation like a personal fiefdom. However, the final blow that destroyed his administration was the highly questionable process used to hire Hong Myung-bo. Supporters of the head coach still try to claim that, because he was the most qualified person for the job, the front office had to personally convince him to sign, arguing that nothing wrong took place. However, this is no longer a matter of opinion or fan speculation. It is an established legal fact, as the judicial system has officially ruled the entire process unlawful. Back in 2024, following intense public backlash after Hong Myung-bo took charge, the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism stepped in to launch a full investigation. The findings exposed a massive abuse of power, revealing that the Federation president had bypassed proper channels, directing a technical director who possessed zero legal authority to single-handedly sign the head coach. On top of that, investigators uncovered 27 other serious violations in how the front office operated. Faced with undeniable evidence, government officials demanded severe disciplinary action, pushing for a suspension of executive privileges for the president and his inner circle. That demand was a clear eviction notice, leaving the president with no choice but to step down. Most recently, the Seoul Administrative Court backed the ministry's findings, ruling that the government's intervention was fully justified. This means that even the highest legal authorities have officially recognized the corruption inside the federation's boardrooms. So what exactly is the biggest issue in this entire scandal? The main problem is that the technical director had absolutely no legal right to select the manager in the first place. When the previous head of the national team committee resigned, bylaws required all hiring powers to revert to the full committee panel, rather than being handed over to a single individual. Yet, to cover up their actions, the leadership shamelessly claimed that the former committee head had voluntarily handed over his authority to the front office, which then passed it along to the technical director. The court immediately shut down that excuse, stating there was zero paper trail or evidence to support the existence of any legal transfer of power. Furthermore, the former committee head publicly stated that he never signed away his authority, proving that an unauthorized official went behind closed doors to handpick Hong Myung-bo at a local bakery. Lately, lawmakers have also been consistently calling for a complete overhaul of the governing body, and the government has even included reforming the Soccer Federation as one of its 100 core national policy goals. Ultimately, it was the mounting legal risks and continuous pressure from the state that forced the Federation president to step down. Yet, fans across the country know a harsh truth. Even with the president gone, nothing inside the front office will actually change. His resignation is merely a symptom of a deeper problem, because the very people who kept electing him to that seat remain comfortably in power. The real crisis lies in the rigged voting system that allowed the president to win term after term. The head of the Federation is chosen by a highly exclusive electoral college made up of regional officials, referees, and inside coaches. In the last election, out of 190 eligible voters, an overwhelming 156 chose the incumbent president, completely ignoring the massive scandals he had brought upon the sport. The sad reality is that even if other candidates run for the office, none of them possess the vision or the strength to dismantle this old boys club. The current situation is no different. Even if a new vote were held tomorrow, the names on the ballot would simply be different faces from the exact same inner circle. In an organization so stagnant and corrupt, expecting a true reformer to stand up against the entire establishment is completely unrealistic. The Domestic Coaches Association operates with that exact same backward mindset. The moment the president announced his departure, the association released a statement expressing regret over his resignation, rather than embracing change. Fans find the outdated arguments used to justify hiring Hong Myung-bo completely unacceptable, especially when the technical director claimed that a foreign manager would struggle to fit into the local culture. That is an incredibly backward way of thinking, because during the previous World Cup cycle, the Portuguese manager proved the exact opposite by leading South Korea all the way to the round of 16. The star players themselves constantly praised the scientific training methods, modern tactics, and professional staff that the foreign manager brought to the table, completely debunking the Federation's excuses. The Federation even suggested that a domestic manager earning a multi-million-dollar salary was perfectly reasonable, an argument that clearly shows local officials are simply protecting their own financial interests and jobs. This greed is exactly why speculation and distrust surrounding the organization never fade. Fans have believed for over 20 years that the front office rejects foreign coaches because they are too difficult to control, choosing instead to install compliant local insiders who will not challenge the establishment. The ultimate irony of this situation is highlighted by the other major candidate on their shortlist at the time. That foreign manager had recently moved to the domestic Pro League and immediately proved his worth by leading Jeonbuk to a league title in his very first season. Despite having that proven track record right in front of them, the Federation ignored him, and the reality of who they chose instead was thoroughly exposed in a recent team documentary. During a pre-game tactical meeting, the manager provided zero actual football instructions, simply telling the squad to go out onto the pitch and fight like absolute warriors. Listening to that uninspired speech, viewers joked that he was preparing the players for a cage match rather than a tactical soccer game. From the corrupt hiring process, to the poor criteria used to judge talent, and now to the disastrous results on the pitch, every single phase of this administration has failed completely. Because of this total collapse, fixing the problem requires far more than just replacing the person on the sideline. The country needs an absolute overhaul of how managers are scouted, a new system for evaluating staff performance, and a complete dismantling of the Federation's centralized decision-making structure. This structural reform is an urgent necessity, because if these changes are not made immediately, the country will continue to repeat the exact same failures on the world stage. The most tragic part of this campaign was seeing the absolute resignation on the players' faces right after the loss to South Africa. There was no anger or shock over the defeat, but rather a quiet acceptance, as if they had known this disaster was coming all along. Fans are deeply frustrated because this feeling of complete helplessness has hung over the national team for 3 long years. Supporters constantly protested outside offices and demanded a fair process, yet their voices were entirely ignored, leaving the public to carry the heavy emotional burden of this failure alone. The leadership was utterly incompetent and opaque, yet not a single executive has stepped forward to apologize or take accountability. After the broad failure at the Brazil World Cup 12 years ago, public outrage was exactly the same as it is today, yet the system did not move forward an inch. Even when the nation's greatest legends and former icons consistently call out the corruption, the institution remains completely unbothered. If things do not change, creators will be making the exact same video in a few years, expressing the same fury over the exact same mistakes, while exhausted fans completely walk away from the sport. The empty seats at the recent Continental Club matches are already proving that the public's patience has run out. Without a total restructuring of the broken system that creates these terrible decisions, South Korean soccer will remain trapped in a cycle of decline. This World Cup has completely drained the energy out of the fan base, leaving people feeling too exhausted to even fight for change anymore. It feels pointless to scream when the establishment refuses to listen. Please share your thoughts on this situation in the comments below. If this analysis captured how you feel about the state of the game, please subscribe and support the channel so we can continue these discussions. The tournament is still running, so let's try to enjoy the remaining matches. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.